Hello, hello. Editing and vacationing Ben here, if you can't tell by the remote location, and that I'm also batch filming these intros. And I had two quick announcements. First of all, my second novel, Expanding Cracks, is currently out there in the world. You can buy that book on eBook and paperback formats at any major distributor. Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, wherever. There will be links in the description below. Second of all, in case you missed it, I just hosted last week a live book launch party. If you have any interest in Expanding Cracks or the Into the Void series or the prequel Falling Through, you should watch that video, and you can do so at this link right here. There were games, there were prizes. I discuss all the secrets, without spoiling anything, of Expanding Cracks. And if you haven't checked it out, I strongly recommend you doing so, because as much as I am sharing my love for Expanding Cracks here, I go into much deeper depth in that video. And now on to my regularly scheduled episode. Take care. Hello, hello! I'm Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through writing metaphors. Fellow authortuber and romance novelist Emma Bennett did the story idea writing tag a few months back, and I decided to get on the fun. Or rather, she did that tag the week I'm recording this, and you're just now seeing my version of the tag thanks to how I upload with my backlog. This tag was created by Blackgirlwriting, and I'll include links to both their videos in the description below. Let's kick things off with number 1, the current story. What's the current story that you're actively working on? I'm editing the second novel of my Into the Void series while writing the third. The second novel is largely the characters dealing with the repercussions from their actions in the first book. In other words, it's them reconciling with the public monster attack and the world knowing they have superpowers. The first book was more of an adventure where they go off and have their fun and then come home, and the second one is what to do when heroes return and how they and their homes have changed. The third book, my current work in progress, is more of an adventure again as the characters go off on a journey. Or rather, the characters split off into two different teams, and they go on two different journeys to achieve their own objectives. Number 2, Spark of Inspiration. Do your ideas begin with the characters, the plot, the world building, or something else entirely? It varies. Falling through the first book in this Into the Void series that I'm currently working on, that all originally started from one climactic showdown that I kept trapped inside my head. I had this really visually interesting scene in which a kid was fighting a bear inside of a volcano. Ultimately, that chapter and scene never took place in the final version of the story, though that inspired me to create this lush world in which that scene could, in theory, take place. Book 2 is a lot more straightforward, and that was inspired by the plot and characters, as the ideas came from direct fallout of the events in Book 1. There's a lot more to it than that, but every challenge and antagonist they face in Book 2 were the direct result of choices made in Book 1. Book 2 obviously escalates every single of the conflicts and ramps up the drama considerably, but those original seeds for the problems they face, they were planted in Book 1. Book 3 branches out a lot more, and that initial inspiration came largely from expanding the world the characters lived in. So each of the books within the series, their core inspiration came from a variety of different sources. Number 3, Brainstorm. How do you puzzle piece the different story elements together? Do you start with the ending and then make your way to the beginning, or vice versa? I kind of touched on this with my answer to the last question, but it varies. For Falling Through, I had this clear idea of what I wanted the ending to be, and then I worked from the start all the way up towards that original idea. Except that by the time I had written to that new story's ending, the original ending no longer worked, so I tossed aside that original ending and wrote an all new one. Book 2, I wrote from beginning to end. With Book 3, I'm back to having this idea of a set piece I want to have at the ending, and now writing from the beginning, it's becoming more of a moving target, and I don't know if I'll actually hit that target or if I'll write an all-new ending by the time I get there. Number 4, keep or toss. How do you know if you want to keep or dump a story idea? My gut. If I'm really interested in an idea, I will find a way to make it work. That may mean I need to take a scalpel to the scene or the characters or the theme or motivation or whatever and move it into a different location or a different book altogether. A lot of the events in book 2 were really things I put in book 1 that I wanted the characters to experience. Even that main character fighting a bear inside of a volcano, a lot of the raw emotions and blows within that fight, that still was included in the climax of the first book. Also, I tend to be an overwriter, so I frequently have to decide whether my written words improve the characters and plot, or if they're just bloat. If my words don't serve a purpose, then I cut them from the story. However, I do realize that I write with a lot of slow burns, so certain events may not pay off until much later in the story, or a different book altogether. Number 5, original idea. How much of your original story idea is used once everything is finished? It varies by mileage. Book 1 was a giant pile of spaghetti that I threw at the wall to see what stuck. In the end, I end up with over 400,000 words, a lot of bad pacing, and plot holes. That excess content showed up in books 2 and to a lesser extent 3, but the original concept of book 1 looks entirely different from the published version. The theme of the published book 1 is much stronger, and events have either been streamlined or cut altogether. As for the characters, their hearts and original inspiration remain largely the same, though their personalities and the way they interact and their individuality has been drastically altered. Number 6, hide or share. Do you share your story ideas with your friends or keep them a secret? I am more than happy to share my story ideas with my friends or strangers, really. It's just I don't often talk about my story ideas, so I guess by de facto I keep them a secret. I've publicly mentioned a few of my ideas in my videos. For example, there's juice. That's where there's this drug which has a 50-50 chance of killing those who use it. Of those who survive, many of them will get superpowers where they then go off to play in this superpowered sports league. Essentially, it's widespread steroids in a sport that encourages violence. I also have this great idea for a time loop story, so you can see that I don't stray far with my ideas because a lot of these common threads and core ideas find their way into my current work in progress series. Number 7, dream. Have any of your book or story ideas originated from a dream or nightmare? Oh yeah. That man fighting a bear inside of a volcano 100% came from a recurring dream I had as a kid. Same thing with the time loop story, where it came from an emotional dream where I woke up on the verge of tears simply for how it shook me to my core and felt so real. Number 8, doppelganger. Have you ever had an idea for a story but then decided not to do it after seeing something similar in a book, TV, or movie? Yes. Before I completely rewrote the first book, the second book was on a collision course to have its climax be what would later become a set piece in an MCU movie. I had this idea for the first 3 books in which humanity was largely going to be wiped out by a virus. The first book was going to be raising up the villain, the second book was going to be them devastating the world, and that book was going to end with a climactic showdown on the one safe island left in the world, which was under that villain's control. Once the villain's deadline was reached and everyone they deemed worthy was safe on the island, or dead, or not going to make it, they raised the island up into the sky. It's there that the heroes fought against the villain and unfortunately destabilized the island, which caused it to come crashing down to Earth. The heroes sacrificed themselves one by one to save as many people as possible, although by the end, only the main hero and villain survive. I had written the critical scenes where the heroes die one by one until all that's left is the aftermath with the main hero and the main villain. Then, a few years later, Avengers 2 came out, where Ultron raised the city into the sky, and the heroes did all they could to save as many people as possible until it came crashing down again. Luckily, when I rewrote the first book, those scenes in the second one no longer made any sense, so they were easy to cut. Also, one of my book 2 editors mentioned how my mall scene shared a lot of similarities with a scene from Stranger Things. What I'm trying to say is that if you have an original idea that isn't already in a book, TV show, or movie, get it out there as soon as you can. There are no original ideas, so sooner or later someone will come up with something that feels similar to our stories. If you can get your book out there in that sweet spot beforehand, then it won't feel like a doppelganger. Otherwise, you can broadcast your inspirations. I listen to the Dead Robot Society, and one of the hosts is an author who takes pride in including aliens and the Thing references in his work. Number 9, big screen inspirations. Have any of my favorite movies or TV shows sparked ideas for scenes in my books? Of course, but I'm going to take my answer down a slightly different path with video games. Recently, I recognized and laughed at how certain games I played as a kid worked their way into my subconscious to influence my books. Aside from a mini half playthrough back in about 2015, 2016, I haven't thought about Final Fantasy VIII since I was a child. Then this year I did a playthrough of the remastered version, and I was surprised how many of my core themes, plot events, and certain specific scenes had taken direct influence from this game I thoroughly enjoyed as a child. And lastly, number 10, nostalgia. What's the oldest idea you remember writing down? I have vague memories of a class in elementary school where we learned how to use this application called Storybook Weaver. There we were able to take different characters and images and drag and drop them onto these colorful settings and add words and text at the bottom. In essence, we were creating our own picture or comic books. I was big into Star Wars at the time, and so I wrote a sprawling space opera. My parents moved out of their old home a while back, and so I found a box filled with printouts from then, and let's say my writing skills have improved by leaps and bounds since I was a kid. There you have it. That's my take on the story idea writing tag. I hereby tag anyone watching this video who wants to share their inspirations. Please, if you do your own take of this tag, feel free to tag me or message me because I am curious to know what makes you write. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. If you were inspired by my answers to this tag, then please press those like and subscribe buttons. Let me know in the comments what core memories made you a writer. I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter for regular updates on my story musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. The link is in the description below. If anything I said about book 2 sparked your interest, then sign up for the newsletter as I send out the first 2 chapters as a freebie. See you next time. Until then, look back on your inspirations on why you write and rekindle them.